Imagine a single parking ticket that can bruise more than a day, it can bruise a name. Providence District Court breathed in low voices and paper rustles. Wooden benches, scuffed by years of waiting, light from tall windows laying pale rectangles on the floor. Judge Frank Caprio turned a page, the motion unhurried, the kind that calms a room. The clerk called the next case. A woman stepped forward, late 60s, neat cardigan, hands clasped around a worn purse as if it might steady her. Ellen Mercer. Former school nurse, according to the note in the file. Today, defendant. Caprio's voice stayed warm. Mrs. Mercer, you're cited for parking in a veterans-only space. Do you understand the charge? Her reply trembled at the edges. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't realize, well, I did see the sign. I only meant to stop for a few minutes to drop medication with my neighbor. A mild stir from the gallery, the sound of a throat clearing, a soft cluck of disapproval. Caprio lifted an eyebrow, not scolding, just inviting her to explain. The space was empty, she added, eyes lowered. I thought no harm would come of it. The judge glanced toward the first row, and paused. A man had stood without being asked. Older, shoulders square beneath a Marine Corps jacket, a service cap folded in one hand, a small medal in the other. He didn't glare. He simply waited to be noticed. Caprio nodded to him. Sir. The man spoke quietly, voice graveled by years. Your Honor, that space is mine. The room tightened into silence. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim. Ellen turned, color draining. I'm sorry. I didn't know. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. 3 years ago they put that sign up after I came home from the hospital. The spot's not for me to feel important. It's for me to make it inside. No anger. Just the plain truth, carried carefully. Caprio looked from one to the other, weighing more than a statute. Mrs. Mercer, he said, the sign was visible. Yes, she whispered. I saw it. I chose wrong. The judge set the citation down, fingers resting on the paper. The benches creaked as people leaned forward and then remembered to be still. Somewhere, a shoe tapped once and stopped. What were you delivering? He asked. Steroids and an inhaler, she said. My neighbor's widow, she had a bad spell. I thought if I ran up and back, her voice thinned, then steadied. I was wrong. Caprio breathed in, slow, and the room breathed with him. No one coughed now. The veteran's hand folded over the medal as if to keep it from speaking. What looks small on paper isn't always small in life, the judge said mildly. A space near a door. A bottle of medicine. A few minutes. Ellen nodded, eyes shining but dry. I understand. From the front row, the veteran inclined his head, the motion almost a salute. Not to himself, but to the truth just said aloud. What began like any ordinary morning had shifted by a hair's width, the distance between a rule and the reason someone breaks it. And that thin distance is where a verdict begins. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The judge inclined toward the man in the Marine jacket. Sir, please state your name for the record. He stood a little taller. Thomas Reeves, United States Marine Corps, retired. That space was put in 3 years ago when I got out of the VA hospital. I don't need special treatment, Judge. I need 20 fewer steps on a bad day. No heat in his tone, just plain fact. He glanced at Ellen, then back to the bench. I saw her park. I'm not here to see her punished. I'm here to see her understand. Caprio turned to Ellen, his voice lowered. Mrs. Mercer, not just where you were going, what pushed you to take that chance? Ellen pressed her purse tighter, as if steadying a tremor. My neighbor, Ruth. Widow. She called wheezing, said the inhaler wasn't working. I kept a spare from her doctor. I thought, 10 minutes, in and out. The veteran spot was empty. I chose speed over sense. She drew a breath and, for the first time, let the rest of her life into the room. I look in on Ruth mornings and nights. I help at the church pantry Wednesdays. My son, she stopped, found the words again. My son came back from service different. He's living at home. Some days the blinds stay shut till evening. He used to fix everything in the house. Now I hide the tools so he won't hurt himself trying to feel useful. The gallery's murmur faded to nothing. Caprio's pen lay still on the pad. I stretch what's in my wallet till the edges show, she said with a small, apologetic smile. So, yes. I knew the sign. But I heard Ruth gasping, and mercy outran memory. Caprio's eyes softened, not indulgent, just human. Mrs. Mercer, the sign isn't about importance. It's about access. Choosing speed can steal someone else's breath. Before she could reply, Reeves lifted the small ribbon metal he'd been turning in his palm. The metal caught a sliver of window light. Your Honor, he said, voice even, I didn't earn this for fighting. Not that one. His mouth curved with something like private sorrow. I earned it for disobeying. A radio order said hold position. A kid on my left was bleeding out. I went anyway. They told me afterward the paperwork would be a mess. He glanced at Ellen. Sometimes you pick the wrong rule to break. Sometimes you pick the right one. He tucked the metal back into his fist, as if to keep it from doing more work than it should. Caprio let the moment breathe. Mr. Reeves, do you wish this court to impose the maximum penalty? Reeves shook his head. No, sir. I wish her to remember that my bad days begin in the parking lot. And I wish her neighbor to keep breathing. Both can be true. Ellen's chin dipped. I do remember. I will. Caprio's voice thinned to a thread of warmth. Mrs. Mercer, understanding does not erase a sign. But it can change what we do the next time we see one. Outside, a siren wailed and slid away. Inside, the judge gathered the threads, a space by a door, a widow's panic, a son's silent room, a marine's short walk. The law was still the law, the people were still people. The room felt it, how those truths could stand together without cracking. Let's continue, Caprio said, not closing the file. There's more here than a ticket, and I intend to hear it. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, fingertips resting against one another. The sunlight had shifted since the hearing began, longer beams now sliced across the courtroom floor, dust drifting through them like faint, suspended snow. The air felt thick, expectant. He turned a page in the case file and frowned slightly. Mrs. Mercer, he said, his voice measured, it appears you've received citations before. 2, in fact, both for parking in the same area. A ripple of sound passed through the benches. Ellen's eyes darted downward. Her hand tightened around her purse strap. Is that correct? Caprio asked. Yes, she murmured, but it wasn't me. Then who? She hesitated. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. My son. The room went still. Even the faint hum of fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench. Your son used your car to park there. She nodded. He doesn't have one of his own anymore. After the discharge, he hasn't been himself. Sometimes he drives around all night. Says he sleeps better in the car than in a bed. Thomas Reeves, the Marine, shifted on the bench beside her. Your boy, he said softly, was he over there? Ellen glanced at him, startled that he understood. Yes. Afghanistan. Reeves's jaw clenched. His voice dropped to a gravel whisper. I thought so. I've seen that look, that wandering without moving. Caprio listened, silent, his expression unreadable. Then he asked gently, does your son live with you now? On and off, Ellen said. Some weeks he's home. Some weeks he disappears. I just pray when I hear sirens that it's not him. Reeves exhaled through his nose, steady but heavy. I've met him, he said suddenly. Down at the memorial. He sleeps behind the stone wall sometimes. Ellen froze. You saw him? Yes. We spoke. Didn't know his name. He had your eyes. He paused, searching her face. Said he didn't want to be a burden. Said his mother carried enough. The sentence landed like a weight no one could lift. Ellen pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. Oh God, she whispered. I didn't know he was there. Caprio's gavel remained untouched. He let the silence expand until it filled every corner of the room. So, he said finally, voice softer now, the citations were his. And you accepted them in your name. I didn't want him to go through another system, she said, choking on the words. He's already been through one. I thought if I just paid what I could, it would stay quiet. Caprio folded his hands. You took his punishment to protect him. She nodded. Mothers do foolish things when they're scared. Reeves shifted again, his face unreadable, but his eyes glistened. Not foolish, he murmured. Just brave. The judge took a long breath. Mrs. Mercer, do you understand that withholding the truth in a legal matter can have consequences? I do. Yet you did it anyway. I did. There was no defiance in her tone, only fatigue, the kind that doesn't sleep. Caprio's voice softened. You remind me of someone I once knew, a woman who thought carrying another's burden would make it lighter. It doesn't. It only makes both of you sink. Ellen's shoulders slumped. I'm already sinking, Your Honor. Reeves looked at her, then at the judge. If you'll allow me, sir, maybe she shouldn't carry it alone. That boy needs help, not a citation, not another uniform telling him to move along. Caprio nodded once, slowly. You may be right, Mr. Reeves. The law cannot punish what compassion can heal. He turned back to Ellen. Mrs. Mercer, I'll have to verify your statement. But for now, I want you to find your son. Bring him here if you can. This court will not close its eyes to him. Her chin quivered. You do that? I can't promise what the world will do, Caprio said. But in this room, we see before we judge. The clerk scribbled a note. The audience sat in perfect stillness. Caprio leaned forward one last time. Sometimes, he said quietly, a case begins with a parking ticket and ends with something larger, a chance for someone to come home. He tapped his pen once, a small, decisive sound that felt like a vow. Court will recess until tomorrow, he said. And Mrs. Mercer. She looked up, eyes wet. Bring your son, Caprio finished. I'd like to meet him. The gavel struck wood, but it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a door opening. Judge Caprio returned to the bench with a quiet gravity that changed the temperature of the room. The buzz of conversation fell away. He opened the file, thumbed through a few pages, and then lifted his gaze to Ellen Mercer. His eyes, still gentle, carried something heavier now, not judgment, but a sorrow that understood too much. Mrs. Mercer, he said softly, where is your son right now? The question hung in the air like the slow drop of a gavel. Ellen hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely above a whisper. I don't know. I last saw him 2 weeks ago. He said, he didn't want to be a burden anymore. Her voice cracked on that last word. The silence that followed was dense enough to hear the clock ticking somewhere behind the clerk's desk. From the second row, a chair scraped softly against the floor. Thomas Reeves rose, slow, deliberate, as if deciding whether he had the right to speak. Your Honor, he said, his voice low but resolute, I know where he is. A wave of whispers rippled through the gallery. Someone gasped. The judge raised one hand for quiet. Even the old wooden rafters seemed to stop creaking. Reeves took a small step forward, every motion deliberate. I saw him last night. Down by the memorial. He was sleeping there, right beside the bench where we place the flags every year for the fallen. The word struck like a soft hammer. Ellen's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Around her, people sat frozen, uncertain whether to breathe. Caprio turned his gaze to the Marine. And you said nothing? Reeves's shoulders tensed beneath his jacket. We don't talk about it, Judge. Not out there. Veterans learn to carry our ghosts quiet. You speak, and people flinch, or they walk away. So you stop trying. Ellen's breathing grew ragged. A single, audible sob broke from her throat before she covered her face with trembling fingers. Caprio did not interrupt. He simply let the silence hold her, not as punishment, but as space to breathe. Finally, Reeves stepped closer to the bench. I'll pay the fine, he said. For her. All of it. But only if she promises to find her boy. To bring him back. No more sleeping beside stone and names. Caprio studied him for a moment, then replied quietly, This court doesn't take heroism as payment, Mr. Reeves. A long pause. His tone softened, not out of pity but respect. But perhaps, just for today, it will take it as collateral. The Marine bowed his head slightly, as though acknowledging an order. The room seemed to exhale. Caprio turned back to Ellen. Mrs. Mercer, your son thinks vanishing protects you. It doesn't. It leaves you carrying both your pain and his. If Mr. Reeves can stand here beside you, you can stand for him. Ellen lowered her hands. Her eyes were rimmed red, her voice small but certain. I'll find him, she said. If he's at the memorial, I know who to call. The judge nodded to the clerk. Contact the outreach team and the VA. Have them coordinate with Mr. Reeves. If there's a name, there's a way. Reeves's jaw tightened. I'll be there tonight. If he shows up, I'll bring him here myself. Not in handcuffs, Caprio said, meeting his eyes. Bring him as company, not custody. A faint murmur moved through the benches, a collective breath of something that felt almost like hope. The judge closed the file without striking the gavel. We're not finished here, he said quietly. We're simply choosing not to look away. His gaze shifted between them, the weary mother, the steadfast Marine. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning. Mrs. Mercer, I expect to see both of you here. Ellen nodded through the tears still clinging to her lashes. You will, Your Honor. Reeves adjusted his jacket, straightened his back like a soldier reporting for duty. You have my word, he said. I'll bring him home. As the judge rose, the sound of his chair against the wooden floor echoed like a closing prayer. No applause, no murmurs now, just the steady, fragile rhythm of breath returning to people who had held it too long. Caprio paused at the bench, glancing once more at the empty veteran's seat near the window. Sometimes, he said quietly, half to himself, justice isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about making sure no one disappears. Then, with a nod to his clerk, he stepped away, leaving behind a room that, for the first time all morning, didn't feel like a courtroom at all, but a place waiting for someone to come home. The next morning, the courtroom filled again, slower this time, heavier, as though everyone sensed something was about to break open. The same faces returned, the clerk arranging papers with extra care, the old man in the back row holding his hat, even the faint smell of polish on the benches. But at the front, in the first row, sat someone new, a young man with hollow cheeks, an unshaven jaw, and a faded field jacket patched with an American flag. Ellen Mercer sat 2 seats away, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She couldn't look at him yet. The resemblance between them was unmistakable, the same soft jawline, the same tremor when holding still. When Judge Caprio entered, no one spoke. He took one look at the young man and seemed to know without asking. Mr. Mercer, he said gently, you're Jason, aren't you? The young man stood. His voice was rough, like something that hadn't been used in a while. Yes, Your Honor. Jason Mercer. Do you know why you're here today? Jason nodded. Because my mom took the blame for what I did. And that's not right. Ellen began to cry quietly, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Thomas Reeves sat nearby, eyes steady on Jason, not judging, not pitying, just seeing him. Caprio leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench. You understand what that means, son. She would have paid your debt, carried your record, maybe even lost her license. All to protect you. Jason nodded again. I know. I didn't ask her to. I just thought if I stayed away long enough, maybe she'd stop worrying. He looked down. But that's not how moms work, is it? A faint smile tugged at the corners of the judge's mouth. No, son. That's not how moms work. Jason exhaled, a sound that was almost a confession. I didn't mean to hide. After I got back, I just couldn't fit anywhere. You come home, but the war doesn't. It stays under your skin. And people, they want you to smile, say you're fine, go back to work. But you're still over there. No one moved. The silence in the room became a kind of reverence. Ellen whispered, barely audible, I just wanted him to come home. Reeves shifted, his hand gripping the brim of his hat. You did, ma'am, he said quietly. You both did. Caprio looked from the mother to the son. Jason, what do you want to happen now? I want to make things right, Jason said. But I don't even know where to start. The judge considered that for a long moment. You start by standing where you are, he said finally. By telling the truth. And by letting people help you. He set the file aside, folding his hands on the bench. Mrs. Mercer, you won't pay a cent. And Jason, neither will you. But I have one condition. Both looked up. You're going to work with Mr. Reeves, Caprio said. He runs a small outreach center for veterans, men like you who've lost their footing but not their worth. You'll help him, both of you. Starting today. Ellen gasped softly. Jason blinked as though unsure he'd heard correctly. I don't mean punishment, Caprio added. I mean purpose. The judge's tone shifted, firm, but warm. Mr. Reeves will guide you. And perhaps you'll remind him what it's like to save someone again. Reeves nodded slowly, almost solemnly. I'll take him, he said. We'll start by fixing the flagpole out front. It leans a little. Laughter broke softly through the tension, a few smiles, a few tears. Jason turned toward his mother. For the first time, he reached for her hand. I'm sorry, he whispered. Ellen squeezed his fingers. Just come home, she said. Caprio rose from his seat. Then it's settled, he said. This court finds that the debt owed is already paid, in courage, in love, and in the quiet act of coming back. He gave a small nod to the clerk, who wrote something in the record. The judge's final words carried through the hall, measured and gentle. This isn't about a ticket anymore. It's about what people do with a second chance. The law can punish. But only mercy can rebuild. A hush followed, then, almost like a breath being released, the room filled with a low swell of applause. It wasn't the loud, celebratory kind. It was quiet, grateful, the sound of people remembering what decency feels like. Caprio raised a hand, silencing the room. Don't thank me, he said. Thank them, for reminding us that justice is just another name for kindness. He gave one small smile, the kind that reached his eyes, and struck the gavel once. The sound didn't echo like an ending. It sounded like something beginning again. Weeks passed, and Providence began to thaw from winter's gray. The courthouse looked different in the morning light, quieter, softer. Somewhere beyond it, the sound of traffic mixed with the low hum of a coffee machine. A narrator's calm voice might have said, every Monday, without fail, Ellen Mercer, her son Jason, and Thomas Reeves walk into the same small building on Broad Street, a community center for veterans. They arrive before sunrise, unlock the doors, and wait for whoever needs help that day. Inside, Jason stacked boxes of donated clothes. Ellen brewed coffee in a dented percolator. Reeves adjusted a flag on the wall that always seemed to lean slightly left. Nothing about it looked heroic, and yet every small act carried weight, the kind of quiet purpose that mends people who forgot what it feels like to matter. Sometimes Jason would stand by the window and watch the buses pass. Children laughed inside, pressing faces to the glass. He'd catch his reflection in the window, tired eyes, but clear, and almost smile. His mother noticed, though she never said a word. On one of those mornings, a local news crew visited the center. They'd heard about the case that turned into a second chance. When the reporter asked why he volunteered, Jason said simply, "I used to think coming home meant walking away from the war. Turns out, it means walking toward people again." Ellen stood behind him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Reeves sat nearby, polishing his old service cap. "He's figuring it out," he murmured. "That's all any of us ever do." Later that week, Judge Caprio gave a short interview outside the courthouse. The wind tugged at his robe as he spoke. "People ask why I didn't find that woman. But sometimes justice isn't about money or guilt. It's about letting someone rediscover their own goodness. You'd be surprised how powerful that can be." He smiled, small and knowing, then turned away before the cameras could catch the glint in his eyes. The story could have ended there, but life rarely ends cleanly. On Memorial Day, the Veterans Memorial was busier than usual. Flags fluttered against a bright sky. Reeves stood near the bench where Jason once slept. Jason joined him, his posture steady, his hands clean for the first time in months. Reeves tapped the metal pin to his chest. "You know why I got this?" he asked. Jason shook his head. "For bravery." Reeves smiled faintly. "No. For saving a man who didn't think he wanted to live. Funny thing is, I didn't realize until now I'd be doing it twice." Jason didn't answer. He just reached out, gripped the older man's shoulder, and nodded. Ellen stood a few steps away, watching, her son standing tall beside the man who had helped bring him back. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of church bells. In the quiet that followed, a line might have played in the narrator's voice, not sentimental, but certain. Justice doesn't always look like a verdict. Sometimes it looks like people finding each other again. As they turned to leave, Jason looked back at the memorial. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place of ghosts, it felt like a promise kept. Somewhere, far behind them, the old courthouse bell rang once. And though no one said it aloud, everyone seemed to understand what it meant. The case was closed. But the story, the human one, had just begun.